This is episode 249 of the Books, Shows, Tunes, and Mad Acts podcast. This episode is titled Family Circus and Jeff Keane. Welcome to Books, Shows, Tunes, and Mad Acts, the show about stuff we like. I'm your host, Jennifer Crittenden, and sometimes I'm lucky enough to be joined by my co-host, Bill Aho, who has an ear for good music and an eye for the extraordinary. Books, Shows, Tunes, and Mad Acts is brought to you by Discreet Guide, the training company for improving your speaking and writing skills. We hope you enjoy the show. I am so pleased to welcome a new guest to the show today. I've got Jeffrey Keane with us, and Bill Aho is here too, holding down the co-host seat. And Jeffrey Keane is the current cartoonist for the cartoon Family Circus, which I was erroneously calling Family Circle. And some of you may actually know it by that name because for a short period of time, it was known by that. So welcome to the show, Jeff and Bill.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
I'll just have a brief introduction here about the history of Family Circus. So it was originally Family Circle. The idea of Family Circle is actually great because you all may know this cartoon as one that is a single frame and enclosed in a circle. It's a syndicated comic strip created by cartoonist Bill Keane, who is Jeff's dad. And since Bill's death in 2011, it's currently written, inked, and rendered colored by his son, Jeff Keane. The strip generally uses a single caption panel with a round border, hence the name of the series, which was eventually changed to Family Circus from Family Circle. The series debuted on February 29th, 1960, and has been in continuous production ever since, which is just remarkable. According to the publisher King Feature Syndicate, it is the most widely syndicated cartoon panel in the world, appearing in 1,500 newspapers. And its compilations of Family Circus comic strips have sold over 13 million copies worldwide. To say that this is a popular cartoon strip would be really an incredible understatement and extremely well known. I mean, you could probably talk to essentially every American, and they would know what this cartoon is. It's really just an incredible legacy. Okay, so one thing that really amused me about reading the Wikipedia article was the lengths that people have gone, fans of the strip have gone to figure out like who's who in the family. And it's about a family, and the children in the cartoon, and the cartoons often refer to other people, other members of the family, the dogs and grandmother and so forth. But it's amazing to me how curious people are to figure out like who's who in the cartoon. So people get very invested, in short, in this cartoon and the antics of the family and the children. And one of the things that also struck me as kind of funny was that there's a running gag in the early versions of the cartoon of one of the kids taking over the cartoon strip, and then like the drawing is different, right, because it's done by a kid. And then that also is quite humorous because sometimes Billy, the one who allegedly takes over the comic strip, but from time to time gets things kind of mixed up. And so there's always a lot of humor involved with that as he misunderstands what words mean and so on and so forth. So does that sometimes strike you as ironic that here you are now having taken over the cartoon strip, just as your dad thought maybe Billy would in the past?
Well, Billy really was a combination of all my brothers. The kid people in the cartoon, when Dad started, there was only three. There was only Billy, Dolly, and Jeffy. I was two when my dad started it, and so that's why Jeffy's in there. And I was also clearly his favorite child. But my sister Gail, who's the oldest one, there was actually 5 kids in our real life family. My mom referred to her as Dolly as a little girl. And so that's where the name Dolly came from. Billy really was a a combination of my other brothers. I have three other brothers, and really my dad as a little boy.
Oh,
My dad was blonde as a little boy, and that's why Billy is blonde. And those cartoons that Billy does, the ones you talk about where I'm mispronouncing, are really pun gags, because my dad was a big fan of puns. And
ah,
for years and years, when he first started doing cartoons, he did. He worked at the Philadelphia Bulletin, did a thing called the Fun Book, and in the back of it there was a thing called Mirthquakers, which used a lot of pun humor, and so he was able to use Billy as sort of a release for his jokes that a lot of people don't enjoy, which are puns, but we have always enjoyed as a family. And I, they always look at it as being a low sense of humor, but it takes a lot of thinking to come up with gags that have to do with puns. But that's why Billy's cartoon drawings are in there, and it gives a nice different perspective for families.
oh, definitely. And the whole idea that I mean, that's one of the things that's interesting about families is every family member has a slightly different perspective. And really, I think this is one of the joys of this strip in general is just to explore the dynamics of families. And I know I've had the experience of talking to my sister or brother about things that I thought happened in our family, and they're like, "What? No, that wasn't what you." So family members, even when you think you're an expert in your own family, you just have a different perspective.
Well, Family Circus was really based on our family, and actually, a majority of the events that happened in the Family Circus also happened in our real life when we were growing up. Taking the vacations, we did them as family vacations. We actually grew up in Arizona. Originally, we were from Philadelphia. When I was 9 months old, we all moved to Arizona, and that was 1959, and the cartoon started in 1960. I think mainly because my dad always drew what was around him. When he was in the World War II, he was drawing cartoons about soldiers and doing things. And then as we moved to Pennsylvania, my mom, who was Australian, they had met in Australia through a roundabout thing. They ended up, he married her in 1948 in Australia. And they came back to the U.S. and lived there all those years. And my brothers and sister were born, and he was successful enough that we were able to move as a family to Arizona, because cartoonists can work anywhere in the world. All they had to have at that time was a mailbox. Now, basically, all you need is an internet connection. You can create and send whatever you want. But as we grew up, Dad was doing cartoons, selling magazine cartoons, and those type of ideas were always based on family. And so therefore the cartoon he created was really based on our family. He didn't really want Daddy necessarily to be thought of as him, but Mommy was definitely my mom. The kids were us. And after a year or so, my mom said, "Well, why are you trying to? Everybody knows this is you." And so Daddy became looking more and more like my dad. At first, the daddy was sort of heavy and sort of a schlubby guy, but eventually, Daddy ended up looking like my dad. And the mom in the Family Circus, Mommy, always looked like my mom. And when she was in the early 60s, when she would go to the grocery store, people would stop her and say, "Aren't you the mother in the Family Circus?"
Oh my gosh, that's crazy.
Yes, I am. And so that was her. And and we would go from Arizona to Laguna Beach every couple of years until eventually we were doing it every year, and we'd spend about 3 weeks. The family would take a family vacation. We would drive in the car to the Grand Canyon. We went back east. We drove around. All Dad's family was back east, and so we visit them. And then the cartoons would tend to also be about what the vacation was or how families react during the vacation or staying in a hotel or whatever. When we went camping, then the next thing you know, the cartoon would have the family camping in the wilderness somewhere, which is something that we did. And then visiting, various cities, New York City or San Francisco or Chicago or places like that. By that time, we were all older. In the 1970s, I was in high school in the mid 70s, and so it was my dad's memories and his ability to make it relevant to the time it was in, but knowing how families were. Because when the cartoon first started, it was really more of a gag cartoon. It was more humor, pretty typical type of family humor. But slowly, it became having a little bit more sentimentality to it. There was a cartoon that Dad did, and I think in about 1967, 68, that had Jeffy coming in and waking up Mommy and Daddy and saying, I don't feel so good. I think I need a hug. And that cartoon got such a positive reaction to people. I think probably were looking for something a little different on the comics page. And my dad was smart enough through the help of my mom to realize, what, every gag doesn't have to be funny.
Yeah.
It can just be about reality and family feelings and the way people react to each other. And if you look at the cartoon, because it's a one line gag, you never see all the incidents that happened before that lead up to that. And if it's all this family hubbub going on around, the reaction to it the parents have is probably different than you would do if you were in that moment.
Right.
But after it, you can look back on it and have an amusement to it. But you didn't have to be laughed. Dad preferred to do a cartoon that was had a tug at the heart or an
emotional connection with the audience, I would think.
Yeah, and partly, that was really the genius of that cartoon, because there was 30 other cartoons on the comics page that had very clever jokes and gags and ways to look in the characters, but this was the one that you could look at and in your own mind relate to as a family. You could see, and it didn't matter what family how the family was configured. Nowadays, it's still the feelings that are presented in the cartoon are the same feelings that everybody has for their hopefully for their parents or their kids or whatever, or they would hope that they had those feelings. There are obviously there's families that have a lot more problems than are presented in the cartoon, but that's for a different day than what I'm trying to present.
You guys did so many cartoons in a year. I mean, every day, and that must be like
how you 365.
Yeah, and but coming up with ideas that daily. I mean, would your dad say, "Hey, go outside and do something funny," or how would he?
Yes, it was the child labor eventually got to get stop. No, and it was hard, during the cartoons are done about 6 months in advance, so it was hard in Arizona having to put on our snowsuits and stuff and going outside in the middle of summer trying to do gags about sledding down a hill. No, it was as I always said, it worked the other way around. People always thought the family circus was based on our family, but it was really our family that was based on a family.
Very meta. Yeah.
You both must be very observant. I mean, watching people and noting things. I mean, that takes a skill in itself, and I'm sure your dad passed it to you with the way he did it, and it's just amazing.
Well, we always thought Dad was just following us around because he liked us, but in the sense he was trying to get ideas. But yeah, it was. That's why everybody isn't able to be, a cartoonist in that sense. It requires somebody to be very observant. My dad was very observant of the life around him and was able to look at that and make it into something that was relatable to everybody. And then, he spent a lot of times writing down gags certainly as we got to be teenagers and beyond that. Then he had to wait till he had grandkids to be really getting the inspiration from little kids. But he had written down gags, and I've got hundreds of gags that he wrote as when we were growing up that you can make changes to that would make them more relevant to today, but the idea behind them is the same. I certainly didn't have the skill that he had to observe. I think I do have the skill of I went to school at the University of Southern California and in theater.
Yeah.
And so that was really what I was planning on being, an actor or something of that sort. And I started to work with my dad to give myself, well, he came to me and said in 1981 or so, he said, hey, how would you like to try and help put together some stuff that'll help further your career and to give you free time? And I agreed, and he was right, because I've now never been further from my career, which was doing this now. Mm-hmm. And but I slowly started to, I would answer mail, or I'd put together calendars or books that you were mentioning. I'd put those together, and then over time I started to do the penciling. My dad eventually said, why don't you try inking, which I had no skill at doing at all. But since I didn't know how to do it, I went and did it with a brush, just like the guy who was inking Dad's cartoon was doing, and learned how to ink with a brush, which is not as common nowadays as it used to be. And slowly I was able to, with his help, to create to be able to draw it and have it look like what he had always done. And that's where over time it just became more and more until, really in the late 1990s, I was doing everything except really the gags. Mm-hmm. And then in the 2000s, my mom passed away in 2008, and I was doing 90% of the cartoon then. Dad died in 2011. And so luckily it was able to just flow seamlessly in the common man's view, not in my view. I can certainly see a huge difference between what was done by me and what was done by my dad. But I had such a backlog of ideas and cartoons that I was able to take those and hopefully make them appear relevant to nowadays. And as I said, families really don't change. The things around families change, and typewriters become computers, and big boxy TVs become flat screen TVs, and so you just change those things around that, but the sentiment is still the same.
And you have your own family now.
Well, yes, but they're all, my kids are now in their, my youngest is, she's going to be 26 this year. At 26, a 29-year-old and a 31 right now. He's going to be 32 next year. But yeah.
But yeah, I mean, fortunately, you had a family, so you could, have more new raw material to work with.
Yeah, but I realized what a genius my dad was, because I didn't find any of that stuff funny when they were being.
I see.
When you were growing up and doing or your dad was doing the cartoons, did you kids feel like I was more popular than that kid because he's featured more in the gags, or?
No, because we didn't even read the cartoon. We didn't no, it didn't. well, at least for me, I was in the cartoon all the time. So what did it matter? But by the time I was where when I'm in high school and doing a cartoon about Jeffy wetting the bed, it wasn't really a great thing to talk about in school. But I don't think we ever were comparing anything to each other. It was more just because Billy was doing something in the cartoon didn't necessarily mean it was Billy who did it in real life. If Dolly did something, yeah, it would have been Gail probably, but it could have been anybody who did it. And my cartoons, it had more to do with the ages we were at. That's why when it started, it was just Billy, Dolly, and Jeffy in the cartoon. And after about a year and a half, 2 years, Dad realized he couldn't do any cartoons about when we were little babies. Jeffy was too old. And so he added PJ to the cartoon that then brought in the idea of an infant that creates a more family dynamic.
Mhm.
I'm not sure if I ever knew, but does PJ have a real name?
Well, yeah, it was Peter John, but it was
Never really used.
never was really. That was only when he was first born. I think that there might have been one cartoon or two cartoons that mentioned it, but he really was PJ. That was what it has always been, and never gets referred to other than that.
Kind of like Gilligan.
Yeah, only PJ isn't on a desert island
Yet.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So were you ever called Jeffy?
Oh, sure. Yes, absolutely. When I was a little boy, yeah, I was absolutely referred to as Jeffy. But every once in a while, someone calls me Jeffy. It doesn't matter to me. I'm not going to answer anyway, so it doesn't.
I'm not that person.
Yeah, it's only when when I was called Jeffrey, then I was in trouble. So if Mom called me Jeffy, that was good. But Jeffrey, then I'd have to figure out somehow that I don't know did it or
Oh, that's really funny. Yeah, not me. Right.
Yes.
That was one of the characters. I thought that was so clever. Yeah. So one of the characters in the cartoon strip is called Not Me. Well, you should explain this.
That's it. Yeah, it's an invisible gremlin that it lives in everybody's house. Is the character Not Me? As anybody who says who traipsed this mud into the house? Well, not me. And we would all be not me as I stood there in my muddy shoes. There was also I don't know. And then there was Nobody. Those were the ones. And then there were a few times there was a character called Oh Yeah, which is oh yeah. I was supposed to be at school. Oh yeah, the bus is going to be was arriving 20 minutes early today or whatever it was.
Yes, as a mother, I've experienced that. Oh yeah, by the way, Mom, I have to bring 24 cupcakes to school tomorrow morning.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
It was more of a waking Mom up and say, yeah, I need an asparagus costume for the show.
Exactly.
I've run into you quite a bit at the Comic-Con, and that's where I first met you a few years ago. At that point, you were the president, I believe, of the cartoonist
National Cartoonists Society. Yes.
Right. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, the National Cartoonists Society started right after World War II by the Milton Caniff, Rube Goldberg, the big names of cartoonists then were doing chalk talks for the USO or those, and so they decided to create this society of cartoonists who were all working cartoonists, and they ended up giving out the Reuben Awards, named after Rube Goldberg, which are equivalent to the cartoonist Oscars, Academy Awards, and in various categories, strip, panel, editorial, cartoon. Over time, the categories have changed. but it really was it was more of a fraternal organization that would try and would meet once or twice a year maybe and do this awards. Cartoonists live such an isolated life that it gave them opportunities to see each other. When it first started out, it was very East Coast centric, but over time, it eventually went over to the United States. Till now, it's actually it is around the world, in Australia, and there's English cartoonists, and there's who are members of the society, and now we do have a couple. There's National Cartoonist Foundation, which does charitable things, visiting hospitals, or those we've done about 10, 15 years ago. We started to once again do USO tours. When my dad in 1968 or 9 went to Vietnam with 4 other cartoonists or so, and did drawings for soldiers at hospitals, and that's such a thing. And then it sort of faded out for years, and then the early to late 2000s, we started up again with cartoon Jeff Bacon, who was he was in the Navy. He said, "Hey, how about if we start doing this again?" And was able to get the USO to help sponsor. We went to Germany, we went to Iraq, we went to Afghanistan.
Wow.
They've been to a couple places in Africa. Haven't done as recently. We started out visiting the hospitals, and so that's all part of the National Cartoonists Society's charitable arms. That we and when it isn't that, then it's really an occasion to go and just see other cartoonists. It's expanded now where it has almost it has cartoonists in animation and book illustration and online comics. And we try and have it be a broader thing. And originally it was pretty centric to newspaper cartoon, but now, as all cartoons, it's much more broad based, and we need those younger cartoonists to join the organization, to continue on with the idea and those type of things, so that they can that remains relevant to what's going on today.
One of my favorite memories at a Comic-Con is I met your dad once at the Comic-Con just to say hi. I think he was there, but we were leaving, and as I walking out, I could see him talking to Matt Groening, and I could just imagine the conversation that those two were probably having about families.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because people think someone like Matt Groening would not have any. What would he have that find Family Circus interesting? When actually, The Simpsons is the same basic. It's a family dynamic, and that it certainly is way different family and much funnier. And but Matt Groening was a fan of my dad's. And one of his best friends, Linda Barry, was a huge fan of Family Circus. And I think that's where sometimes people get hung up on what the cartoon is based on and think, well, there's no way that they would have anything common. They're both creative minds, and you're able to observe what the appeal is. It may not be the same appeal that you're doing, but it takes an incredibly creative person to create anything nowadays. Every cartoonist starts exactly the same way. Well, when I started out, is a blank sheet, white sheet of paper. What comes out of it is the same type of creation process. It doesn't matter whether the cartoon's being done for Playboy or the newspaper. They're incredibly creative, and in some ways that's the great thing about the National Cartoonist Society and the cartoonists in it. Rarely do you find people who are jealous of each other, so to speak, because I think we all know that whether you're in 10 papers or 1,500 papers. It's still one cartoon, one cartoon a day that you've got to do. And certainly people are, I'm way luckier than the guys who had to create it from the very beginning. I was grandfathered in or fathered in,
Yeah.
which certainly, I appreciate every day. And I understand that I'm far luckier than any other of the cartoonists, except the other ones who are kids of cartoonists.
Except for them. Yeah. We'll have a
Well,
carve out for them.
creativity is one of the things we champion on the show quite a bit, and is something that people don't really, if you're not creative, you don't really think about it, or they want to be creative and they think they can just go out and be that way. But it's something you kind of have to have a spark of. Otherwise,
Well, I think people make the mistake of trying to create something that is popular, and that's a fool's game in some ways. You've got to, anybody who ever asks advice about I want to have a successful thing. Well, then you've got to have it be based on your beliefs or what you feel, and it's got to come from your experiences and your life. You can't just go, how, peanuts, a dog on a roof. How about if I have a cat on a roof? That's going to be successful. But in the end, you might be able to come up with something for a year.
Mm.
But this is, at least newspaper cartoons are, this is every day. And eventually you're going to burn yourself out. And anybody who's just sets out to be successful, they don't care what the cartoon is. They just want it to be successful. They're going to find it doesn't have the depth that it needs in the long run, because you've got to have it based on something
the heart,
or that you feel, and then you're able to create something that's going to be a lot more successful in your own mind. It may not be any more successful out in the world, but at least you're creating something that that means something to you. And therefore that's the best you can do.
Tell me a little bit about drawing skills, because, I get it when you say you've been fathered into this, but that, drawing, that's a real skill, and you didn't go to art school, and I guess your dad didn't either, but somehow you guys both are really good drawers.
Yeah, my dad never went to art school. And the only art school I went to was, learning at his knee, basically. And, so everybody actually can draw if you work at it and do it. But in the end, if you don't really love drawing, you're not going to be as successful as some. I mean, it's as with everybody can write in some ways, but you've got to really love to write in order to become a successful writer. You can't just walk into it. And so, yeah, the skill of drawing is something that's important. But as you can see in a lot of cartoons now, you don't have to draw very well. I mean, as we all see, Pearls Before Swine, you don't have to draw really well in order to do the cartoon, but it's funny, and Stefan has created something that really means something to him, and it's funny. It's not meant to be, and the drawing of the cartoon I find is perfect for the cartoon it is. If Family Circus wasn't drawn as well as it is, I don't know that it would be looked at the same. But certain cartoonists, you might look and go, well, this guy doesn't draw that well, but it really fits the cartoon. There's a cartoonist, Kevin Fagan, who's for years he does Drabble cartoon, and I love Drabble. It was always funny and relevant, and yeah, his drawing was not as precise as Prince Valiant or whatever, but it was perfect for what he created, and it made it funnier because of the way he draws. And if he drew what would be considered more correct, Bern Hogarth physical anatomy drawings, it wouldn't be as funny because the characters it doesn't relate. And so drawing, as important as it is a skill in cartooning, it's not necessary to be successful at. It has more to do with where the drawing, your skill of drawing in relation to what the gag is that you're, or what the characters are you're trying to do. A true cartoonist is creating what is good for him, and sometimes we get hung up on how well something's drawn, and that's a different admiration than necessarily the success of a cartoon. And every kid can draw. It's just whether they continue to do it or not. And if it brings them joy, they'll keep doing it no matter what it becomes in their life. Just like people who write.
Boy, I'm thinking as you're talking about all of the different aspects of cartooning that have to come together, especially if you just have a single frame. Because as you say, there's observation, and there's, I don't know what to call it. It's almost like a sociologist or something, where you can see the universal aspects of something that's happening in a family and recognize that that's going to appeal to a large number of people. And the twist that you put on it, right? Obviously, Simpsons have a certain twist. Family Circle has a certain twist, but you have to recognize that there's something universal in that, which is why we love The Simpsons and love.
Well, that's right. I mean, Matt is doing something that he finds, if he laughs, then most likely everybody else is going to laugh too. And, when my dad would do a cartoon, if he enjoyed it, most likely everybody else would enjoy it too. You can't over edit yourself.
Right.
Spend time trying to, this isn't quite clever enough. Then you're going to end up with nothing because for one thing, you've got a deadline, so you better come up with something.
Yeah. The other thing I was thinking that really shows in Family Circus is your dad's, and probably yours too, enjoy the joy that you take in words, right? Because there's a lot of writing that goes into making. Family Circus.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, you can, and I think maybe that's my theater background. In some ways, I am creating a little play.
Yeah.
Each in the cartoon. So, depending on who's speaking, Jeffy, Dolly, Billy, Mommy, Daddy, the language or dialogue is different, and it's more relevant. And sometimes that actually makes the gag a little better because of pronunciation or whatever it is. And doing Family Circus is a single panel. Most cartoons are strips, a series of panels, and there's pluses and minuses to each. I don't have to, the reader supplies the first panel, then the cartoon is there as a response. So you have to make up your own thing that happened beforehand, which sometimes can be harder to make sure that in the gag or in the line, you understand what happened before. Right. Unlike a strip where you can do the previous panel and you can end it with the gag, but then in strips it's difficult because you've got to come up with a series as opposed to just being a single idea. And so that's a plus and minus in both. There's difficulties and skills in both.
But yeah, I'm realizing this combination of skills that have to come together to be a good cartoonist. Yeah, it's pretty remarkable when you think about it, all the things you have to know and be able to do. I think we think of drawing first, but yeah, there are all these other aspects to it. Yeah, it's pretty remarkable.
I guess you have to know what you're going to draw in order to draw it. So you have to have some kind of picture in your mind that you're working toward.
Yeah. It's the words come first or drawings come first. Who knows? It's like a chicken and an egg. A chicken can't draw either. So I don't know.
Do you have any favorites from your dad's era?
Well, the I don't feel so good, I think I need a hug is a cartoon that, because that was me. But there, I don't. What I like to do is I go back and I look and I read the cartoon, and I can remember how it relates to my family growing up. And I guess maybe that's the one of the joys of being able to do this is, every day I'm thinking about my mom and dad, our family, my brothers and sister. And, I see that in the cartoon, which then reminds me of, my family, my kids, and how it's something that the average person doesn't get to do in their job. Everybody who has a great love for their parents doesn't get the opportunity to see what they were doing when we were little or whatever. And I get to relate to that every day. Sometimes it's, it brings tears to my eyes to think about, oh yeah, I remember this, or like a certain cartoon that Dad did that, growing up, I certainly didn't realize the meaning behind them. And I remember a cartoon when I was in the 80s, when I started looking, there was a cartoon that had Mommy and Daddy arguing in the first. It was a Sunday page that it was like 3 panels going across, and arguing and fighting, and you could, Jeffy in bed, and he's starting to be worried, and then you see them fighting again, and he's even more worried, and then there's a panel of them making up, giving each other a kiss and a hug, and then Jeffy's back asleep because everything's okay. And to me, that's an exact replica of what I would go through. My mom and dad would be arguing, or Chris and I were in bed in our room, and you could hear them arguing, and it always made me worried. It's like, what's going to happen? What's going to happen with them? And then, but eventually there was silence, and I would go back to sleep, and I realized Dad was on the other side of that.
Right.
However, I bet he was remembering it as his own childhood, his parents fighting over something. And then as with all things, that anger, in the end, the love that you have for each other overcomes whatever it is. And your kids go back to sleep nicely. And I know at the time I thought I was the only one who was experiencing that. But then when my dad did it, clearly he had been experiencing it. He had been experienced on the other side. And it's something that's universal. It will always be.
Yeah.
No parents and family doesn't have them arguing at some point. And that's where I think some people get the misinterpretation, or they feel that the Family Circus, everything's sunny all the time. Everything's so great. But it's not. It's they were real people, and that's the good thing about that. The cartoon is that I'm able to put in these real situations, and in the end, realize that the love of family is what's most important. It doesn't mean that they're a perfect family by any means. It's just they're people, and they care about their kids just like 90% of other people do, and they can relate to it.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that we've realized, right, with Family Circus, is that these family dynamics are so common, right? And that's, I think we think, all families are dysfunctional, and my family's super weird. There's no family like my family. And then something like Family Circus makes you realize, no, actually, yeah, this is sort of just what it's like to grow up as a human in a human family.
Yeah, and they just go along, and if it had been anything other than that, then I don't think it would have been as successful as it is, because my dad wasn't editing to try and make the cartoon family be a perfect family by any means. But
no, not at all. I mean, yes, no, there are lots of things that happen in there that I'm sure people would look askance at. Have you had any experiences with people contacting you from other cultures or other countries where you're like, oh, I didn't realize this would work in this culture, but it does?
It hasn't been translated in too many other languages. I
Okay.
think but it has. I mean, I know it was in French, it was in Spanish and I think that has partly to do with the play on words.
Yeah, it'd be hard
A
to
lot of
translate.
things, Dolly will mispronounce something, and it doesn't translate exactly that way.
Hmm.
There are different countries that have, like Family Circus, cartoons in England and actually in Australia are different types of cartoons.
Mm.
A lot of them are a little bit more biting or a little bit more sarcastic or whatever, and therefore Family Circus, it seems very even more tame than what others, and so I'm not sure that it doesn't translate quite as well into a newspaper. The person reading it, the individual reading it, would understand it, but they're and appreciate it that way, but they wouldn't. The newspapers, it wouldn't necessarily have a cartoon like that in it because it's a little bit too easygoing, and they like something a little bit wackier, or Benny Hill like, or whatever it is.
Yeah, they wouldn't select it because it doesn't really fit their
No,
editorial
and
criteria.
I understand that. That makes
Yeah.
sense to me. I know it's in India.
Oh,
They've got, but it requires, certainly I don't translate it.
right.
I'm not,
Mhm.
I'm not that smart to be able to do it in other languages, and hopefully it translates well where they don't use certain cartoons or whatever it is. But there's books and that they will translate into other languages, and hopefully it comes across. And if it doesn't, they should just tear out that page and throw it away, and then just keep the good cartoons. That's the ones that are relevant.
One of my favorite things of the cartoonist is the April 1st edition, where at some point, I don't know who came up with it, but you guys were switching comics for,
Yeah, that was.
and that was really, when it first happened, it was like, wow, this is pretty cool. It's like different perspectives of things.
Right.
I was kind of wondering if you could pick the one you could do. Do you have a favorite cartoon that you would like to draw for a April 1st type thing, or do you have a bit that you've always thought, oh, this would work good for LCAP or whatever? I mean,
No, not really. No, I mean that was a one-time thing that all the cartoonists exchanged, or not all the cartoonists, but there was a group of them that decided, oh, I'll do yours and you do mine, type of thing, and it worked really well. I don't think it would work well every April 1st, and that was a one-time thing. Yeah, I know that Gary Larson,
Mm.
The Far Side, was going to do the Family Circus.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, my dad was going to do a Far Side, but in the end, it didn't work out that way. I don't know if Gary might have been retired by then, or had stopped doing it, and he wanted to. But in the end, it didn't come about. But that would have been clever to see.
oh yeah.
I always enjoyed seeing the other person's perspective on.
Oh, yeah.
It worked well.
Yeah, the mind reels at what might have been.
Yeah, that's right.
And
Yeah.
one of the things I thought was interesting too was that that you have been so generous about other people spoofing Family Circus, or
like Stefan.
yeah, and that you thought, well, that's okay, right?
My dad. I learned from you. You can't, if it's not popular and well known, you can't spoof it. Nobody will get it, and so it's I always find it to be a sign of respect.
Yeah,
that they come up, and some of them are really funny. Some it's like, okay, some are okay, but and to me, I like to see them. I mean, there's Mark Tutuli, who does Leo. He'll put the kids in there, or Family Circus, and I just, I so appreciate seeing that, not only because it shows, the legacy that my dad created to make it recognizable, but also it just becomes funny to me to see how they can be used, who uses this or that. And if it's not well known, if it's not, you can't parody something that no one understands. So it's a sign of success in some ways, and rarely is it ever mean-spirited or anything like that. And if it is, then that I look at it, it's like, well, that's their thing. But I really appreciate when somebody does that and does it well, like actually Stefan who has done, and Mark has done, and I've got a file of cartoons that, and it's just so great to be able to see them and how they use dotted line or whatever is the kids in some strange situation or whatever it is. It's the way it's supposed to be to me. It's all we have a great sense of humor.
I was just going to say, I forgot that when I was listing skills for cartoonists. Yes, obviously, sense of humor is very important. So, yeah, it sounds as though both you and your dad had a sense of humor. Was that a big part of your family? Did everybody?
Oh, yes, absolutely. In fact, that was what I think drew my mom and dad together. Was they would just laugh together and find humor in the most ridiculous situations. One's trying to be, my dad was always trying to be a very important guy or whatever, and then something would happen and it would just put him back in his place, and they would just laugh about it, and he wasn't upset about it. They would just go, it's just, you'd shake your head and go, well, I guess I got what I deserve, type of thing, which is lacking a lot in people nowadays.
Yeah.
The ability to just, hey, just relax and don't take everything so seriously that that's what that's the way I take it. I enjoy a good joke as much as anybody, and the ability to laugh with each other is important, as long as it's laughing with each other and not laughing at somebody's downfall or whatever it is.
One of the things I noticed in looking through the bio type thing was how many books are out there of the compilations, and how many there was some like 2 or 3 cartoons that were done, like holiday cartoons. And I even noticed that there was a movie that was being proposed at one point, live action movie, and I guess we didn't see it, so it must have stopped at some point. But
there's still some movie TV type things that keep coming up, and I would love to have a Family Circus on TV or in the movies. I think in movies it was hard because I don't think you can do it as live action with the kids at their age now, because it's just, for one thing, the kids actually are talking a little older than what they would be in real life, and also very quickly they would grow up. So as a TV series, it wouldn't work live action. Now animation, it could, but I think it needs to be a kids TV show that then can go into all sorts of areas and kids' imagination and using those things. And I have had interest, it just hasn't quite come about. Several times it's been there's some very creative screenwriters. There's one woman in particular who's written some really good stuff that was very clever and very correct for Family Circus, which is my biggest thing, is it's got to stay the way it is. And unfortunately, they just haven't been able to quite get someone to pull the trigger and actually do it. but I'm always interested in trying to see if it can be translated into another form. In that sense, Dad did do 3 animated specials when
Oh,
1979 and 80 and 81, or 78 and 79, 80. There was a Christmas special, a Valentine's special, and an Easter special, and the stories were very good. They're very different for nowadays, and the animation was okay. It really it lacked animation, but the stories themselves had nice, simple stories to them. I don't think they would, work nowadays because it was just a little bit too simple and slow, so to speak. Just move it. The pace was, the pace then, where the pace now is really quick and a lot of editing and stuff. So it would be nice if we were able to do something like that, and I am very interested in trying to do something, but it has to be done correctly.
yeah.
The movies that were written, the first couple versions of scripts they were fine as far as movies, but it wasn't Family Circus. It didn't need to be Family Circus. I'd read it and go, but this family, it's not family. It can be any family,
Right.
but it wasn't specific to Family Circus in the setting, and it needed to stay the same. Clever script writing is, it would have worked as any family,
Yeah.
and whether it be successful, I don't know, but it has to be specific to the feelings that Family Circus has as a broad readership. It can't just fit for teenagers to really enjoy, or the older people to really enjoy. Family Circus reaches across a broad spectrum. There's certainly ages where Family Circus is more relevant to people than other times. I guess maybe if you're a 20-year-old guy or whatever, and single and dating and stuff, it seems silly. But at least I find that guys tend to dismiss it, as opposed to women. Almost at any age, I think there's something that they are able to realize. It's okay to feel. It's okay to feel something here, and I think they're more open to the idea of feelings and things than necessarily, and that's a good thing for them. And guys tend to go, I'm not gonna, it's like, oh, it's just too, it's too touching of the heart, whatever it is. I don't really want to deal with that. But I think probably when they're alone, and if they weren't with a bunch of guys, then they'd read it and they'd remember and or look forward to, because when they get married and they have kids, all of a sudden it becomes very relevant again. But that's as with all things. We go through phases. The comics page is that way to me. There's cartoons that I read a lot when I was little, and then I didn't read them at all when I was a teenager, and then when I had kids, then I would go back and read these others, and Peanuts I would read as a young, then I dropped off reading it, and now I'm reading it again. And that's what's great about a comics page. It's full of all different ideas and different cartoons, and you don't have to read every cartoon, but you read the ones that are relevant to you at that time. And then ones fade off, and they fade, just like I'm sure Family Circus does for people. They stop necessarily meaning so much to them, and then later on in life, maybe they'll go back and read it again. And that's what's important about comics pages, is to have a variety of stuff, not to be married to one type of cartoon or one perspective, but to have the very eclectic mix of ideas and things, so that people can pick and choose, because they will, and they that's the way comics page should be, at least to me.
Yeah, I think that's good.
I agree. And we were talking just briefly before the show about my memories of wanting to learn how to read so I could read the comic page. And
Right.
there's something just very nostalgic about children reading the comics page, right?
Well, you're not the only. Yeah, I mean, I've heard that quite often. I have a great cartoonist friend, Rick Stromasky, who said, yeah, his daughter learned to read by looking at Family Circus, and he's not the only one who said that to me. But it's I think it had something to do with, it's usually a very simple caption at the end, and you can learn and you can understand usually what's in there. I think as parents, they were pretty safe letting their kids learn to read that one. There wasn't going to be anything in there necessarily that they had to describe too much of, or explain too much. And that's, once again, that was my dad's genius, in that he was able to create something that generationally it could be read and enjoyed by grandmothers, sending them to their daughters, who then send them to their daughters, who sent, and their sons. And so many times I'm at I'm signing at the Comic-Con or whatever it is. Somebody will come up and say, my I can remember my grandma used to cut these out and send them. And it brings back such wonderful memories for them. And these are families of all ethnicities.
Mm-hmm.
This isn't just a series of Caucasians walking up. There's Hispanics and African Americans and Asians that come up and they say, they would cut out and it means something to me. And to me, that shows that those people are able to relate to something that necessarily doesn't look like them, so to speak. That's a great thing for those people, because there's so many people now who just won't read, that's not going to relate to me. Or there's the cartoon Jumpstart, which is Rob Armstrong, but it's an African American family. Some newspapers won't run that. We've already got a strip that already has, is an African American strip or whatever.
Oh my.
Curtis or whatever it is. And I think it's happening less now, but it's hard for those guys to get their cartoons necessarily in every paper, because they think, we don't need that. But that's where I think we all make the mistake of, I can't see myself necessarily in this, so I'm not going to read it. And clearly those other cultures don't, or nationalities or ethnicities are able to go beyond that. And it would be nice if all of us were able to go beyond that, and
or not assume that be
able to find the nuggets of truth in all of those cartoons.
Yeah, our shared experience.
Like a lot of things, I think a lot of times it just takes that one cartoon or that one piece of music or that one article in a book or whatever to get people inspired to want to read and experience more of it. I mean, if someone reads your strip and they go, wow, that one really, I can see that was our family. And then it kind of makes them want to see what else the family is up to. So it takes sometimes a connection to it in a way that we don't even think about.
Yeah. Well, I think that sometimes we put too many things in a specific category and don't realize that, you can learn something from all the categories.
Yeah.
Yep, I agree. Well, what a great note to end on. And Jeff, I want to thank you for coming on the show. It was such a pleasure to meet you, especially because you are such a handsome man.
Yes, that's true. And this is the way to always meet me, especially online. In person, it's not so great.
Yeah, it's been so fun to talk to you. Thank you so much. And good luck with everything. Please keep in touch with us. We'd love to hear what you're up to if you've got any news.
Yes, and if people want to read the Family Circus, all I have to do is go to a local paper and see if it's in there, and then buy a subscription.
Well, it's usually in there.
Yes, but more people need to read the newspaper more than necessarily just being online.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Yep, it was my pleasure. I enjoyed it. I'll see you in the funny papers.
Okay.
Right. Sounds good.
Bye now.
Thanks, everybody, for listening. We really appreciate it. Don't forget to check out the show notes for additional information about this episode. And give us a like or a thumbs up on Podomatic or wherever you listen to your podcasts. We'd also love to have your support on Patreon. And get in touch. We'd love to hear from you through the internet or Twitter or whatever means works for you. And finally, thanks to Caffeine Creek for the theme music.